Go.
All right, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Secular Foxhole Boomcast. Today, Martin and I have two great guests, James Valliant and Warren Fahy, are here to discuss their documentary and their book, Creating Christ, How the Romans Invented Christianity. Yeah, good afternoon, gentlemen. How are you?
We're
Good,
real good.
thanks.
How are you, sir?
It's great to have you. Believe me, I love how you open your documentary or the documentary by having the viewer think you're talking about present day events in the Middle East. Yet it isn't, is it?
Well, there we can take some credit,
Oh,
I guess. The documentary was, first thing I want to say is that the documentary was created and produced by not Mr. Fay and myself, although inspired by our book. We're looking at Emmy Award nominated documentarians who've done
Nice.
previous documentaries. They had the creative control. They made all the visual and musical decisions. They edited it. I wish that I could take any credit in such a magnificent documentary. I'm very pleased with it. But the creative decisions are theirs and out of our control. We signed the rights over to them. But you happen to choose one issue where there's overlap between the book and the documentary. I can only assume that they
Yes.
used the book's start that way to
Yeah.
inspire
The
their
year 66 or 2022.
right. And if you think
right.
about it, the war, that ancient war from 2,000 years ago, in one sense, hasn't stopped.
Yeah.
And we meant to give people a vivid connection between religion and politics in our own time and how it leads to political violence and terrorism, and how primordial religious ideas are still at war with more advanced Western ideas. The basic conflict hasn't changed.
I know.
Uh,
Right.
James, Warren, and my co-host Blair, and please take care here with your voice also. We recommend stopping the recording before hanging up the cell. Okay, so that's also information. So for the call, so we're doing this live. But I want to do a shout out and a thank you note to Fritz Heed. Is that correct pronunciation?
Yes.
Could you tell,
Fritzy.
because I got access, because this is, the license and so on in mainly in North America,
Yes.
but I got access to that, so I could watch it, and I'm blown away, and it's a great documentary. So could you please tell a little bit more about them, Fritz he and his collaboration, his companion, and their work, and then Blair, you continue with the questions.
Sure. Go ahead, James
Yeah.
or
Well,
Warren.
Let Mr.
uh-huh.
Fay take
They were they're documentarians who also did a documentary on Joseph Atwell's book,
Mm.
Caesar's Messiah, and so they contacted us after the book came out, and they were interested in doing a documentary based on our book as well, and so that we spent a few days with them doing interviews, and we visited a Catholic church and looked at all of the symbolism that was in the architecture of the church, and it was rather vivid, anchors and dolphins everywhere. And so we they took all of that material, and over the last 2 years, they put together this documentary.
Okay.
it. It
Great.
was really, they came to where Mr. Fay was living at the time, where I live still, and we went to the main Catholic church, one of the oldest here and biggest here in San Diego, which is located at the university where I went to law school. But of course, I'd never stepped through the church, the cathedral part, what they call the Immaculata, at all. That was my very first visit to that structure, that church, and both Mr. Fay and I were simply blown away as we walk in for the very first time. Yep, there's an interesting symbol. Well, here you got your anchor. Well, over here you got. We were just constantly pointing out all the various things and all the various niches in the church that
Yeah,
relate.
once you have that symbolic key, then you look around, you see it everywhere. It's amazing. The whole church was practically made out of anchors, and then there were flourishes of dolphins everywhere. It was just amazing.
Lest you think
And
what
people,
we say, right?
yeah,
Walk
Yeah.
into
and
any
people never
workshop.
put that together, which is,
I can hear everyone,
yeah,
so it should be good.
it's a miracle. yeah, it's miraculous that nobody ever put those symbols together before. I think that there was a little zigzag in the way that those symbols were interpreted in the modern day, because it was erroneously associated with Augustus's saying "festina lente," and which means "make haste slowly," which was Augustus's favorite saying. And so it was assumed that he had issued a coin with a dolphin and anchor on it, which never happened. Augustus never did issue that coin. He had a symbol of a trident and a dolphin wrapped around it, but never of an anchor with a dolphin wrapped around it. And so, and because of that was transposed to think that it was a symbol of festina lente, of Augustus's saying, it got completely overlooked as a symbol that was used by both Christians and the Flavians. So that disguised what was going on for a long time. And in fact, we do know that Augustus had a symbol that he created to express the idea of make haste slowly, or festina lente, which was a snail shell and a rabbit's front, moving along fast, but a snail behind. And so that's how he actually illustrated that saying. And it never had anything to do with a dolphin or an anchor. So that was a confusing thing that probably let people forget and not catch what was going on between the Christians and the Flavians until we had to unravel that as well. So,
in fact, the first association of anchor and dolphin with festina lente cannot be attested until the Renaissance, 1500s, right?
Right. Yeah. It was the famous printer used it as his the logo of his publishing company, and he probably is the one who misascribed it to Augustus's coin.
Right.
But it is known that the Flavian emperors were the first to use the symbol.
Or used to use, yeah. And
Well,
only members used it at all.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
The first and second Jewish revolts was just interesting.
So what ignited your quest to discover Christianity's origins? What was there something you both discovered, or both one said to the other, "Hey, look at this," or what began the quest?
We were both interesting. We both came from Christian families, and we both had a Christian background, in effect. As a child, I think I took it more seriously longer than Mr. Fahy did. I think he was wiser in dumping the whole thing earlier on. And he fortunately had a father who told him that an open Bible was a closed mind. And so he had some good people telling him, helping him get out of that his own way when he was a child. But even after we both became atheists, he is by nature a researcher. He is, I guess, what we would call a wonk. He will become an expert on the detailed science of whatever that he is studying. And so over the years, we've known each other since childhood. We've had all kinds of fascinating discussions. We really, as teens, discovered Ayn Rand together, for example, and much of philosophy together. He always wanted to be a novelist, even before he'd read any novels by Ayn Rand. And he was a brilliant writer even as a teen, and he's gotten only more masterful since, in my opinion. I recommend every novel that Warren Fahy has ever published. They are some of the finest. He's the finest living novelist of our time. I will be that blunt about it. And I do know I'm biased. He's a childhood friend of mine, but I read a lot of novels. He's just a stupendous writer. I myself wanted to use the knowledge I got from being a Christian more. And so I continued my studies. After I discovered philosophers like Rand and Nietzsche, I had an inspiration one day at a library reading Josephus, and I was so inspired by it that I cut a beeline when the traffic calmed down to Mr. Fahy's home, and I started pounding on his poor little apartment. Oh, you gotta wake up! You gotta wake up, dude! You gotta wake up! I'm so excited about one of the many connections, mind you, that we talk about in the book. It was just one, but it led to a whole series, a chain reaction of other implications and hypotheses. He, finally comes out, in his boxers, needs a shave. Okay, Jimmy, this better be damn good. I said, no, really. But that's the kind of relationship.
And that was 35 years ago. And it took over 30 years to finally put it all together into the book. So,
wow.
But yes, he chewed my ear off for hours that first night, and really we kind of came to the conclusion that was pretty close to what the end thesis was, which was that that Christianity began as a sort of proto imperial cult of the Flavians, or at least an aspect of their imperial cult. And of course, it got modified, and we focused in more tightly over the years. But that was the takeaway, even from the very beginning.
I see. Well,
And at that point in time,
Well, and
go ahead.
since that time, we each
Oh.
found such important evidence along the way that we just grew more and more certain that we would have to present this in this way. Back to the image issue that he brought up about Festina Lente. Since the publication of Creating Christ, we've gotten some remarkable praise and endorsements from various people. One of the most remarkable is Professor Marcus Vincent. He has just retired from King's College London, where he taught this. His erudition in ancient history and this particular matter, early Christianity, is astonishing. He knows numerous ancient languages. He is in particular, and has been over the years, an expert in ancient Roman iconography, particularly as it relates to the Christians. And recently been converted to Roman Providence thanks to our book. And he is now currently working on a new book with various authors who advocate Roman Providence. So it really has been an exciting, overwhelming time. I did not think that the book would have that kind of impact, but for so shortly, for people like Dr. Price to say such nice things, and Professor Eisenman, Professor Marcus Vincent, to say such nice things, it's been a really, really, really remarkable to have a documentary made on your book within 5 or 6 years of it coming out. I really am blown away by the reaction. I thought, in 100 years they might dust it off and say, these guys may have had a point, but to have this kind of reaction has really blown me.
Well, that's great. I know that Dr. Price and Dr. Eisenman are well-renowned scholars in their fields.
They're controversial, but they have an international reputation. Well, so is Professor Vincent. But I think you have to be an open-minded, creative mind to be at the cutting edge with us on this. I think we should expect pushback both from standard academia and establishment types, as well as Christian, obviously, from your sincere Christian apologist types.
Yeah. Speaking for myself, I rejected religion when I was 7, and but unfortunately, I had to go to church till I was 18. But so a lot of damage was done, so to speak. But I could just remember, what is this garbage? It's so boring, And but that aside, for me, Christianity. Well, I said in my question, it's a hoax, but it's more. Is it a conglomeration of that they take over pagan rituals and other myths, and then combine them into that faith, or am I even close?
I think that religion and statecraft were one and the same in the ancient world, and that's just how they did politics. So we separate it today, and one's on one side and the other, but there wasn't any separation back then.
That makes a great deal of sense. Yeah.
You think of what the American Revolution did by creating a secular government, no established religion, freedom of exercise. You think even of what Napoleon did in attempting to secularize the governments of continental Europe. We today, 200 years on from those developments, we think of law as a secular thing, and we think of religion as a separate thing. So that when, say, jihadists come out and say we want to enforce Sharia law, what do you mean you want religious law to be? Not in the West, thank you very much. We've gotten over that, you see, in the West. In the Islamic world, I certainly have not. But you go back more than 300 years, there's no separation between church and state. The kingdoms of Europe that still have kings and queens have established state churches unto this day, which is really astonishing if you think about it. Now, uh, everything in the ancient world that was political had a religious interpretation. And every religious idea is obviously being manifest in the historical events of their moment. They saw them all in those terms. The Roman Republic was a sacred institution blessed by the gods. They had an official, they had official state religion. They all did. The Jewish revolt itself had religious causes. They wanted to enforce the Mosaic law within their own territory, much the same as consistent Muslims today want to enforce Sharia law in their countries. And so it was a question of Roman governance and law and religious perspectives, along with the Jewish governance and law, along with the religious perspectives that informed them. But an event like the Jewish War of the first century, or the next great Jewish revolt of the second century under Bar Kokhba, were explicitly religious in nature. Ancient commentators said they were religious in cause. It was the messianic prophecies of the Jews that caused this, what we would call today, say, terrorism and religious jihad warfare 2,000 years ago. And it was a catastrophic war. And we just simply could not believe that that messianic inspired religious war of the first and second centuries was disconnected to the emergence of Christianity at that very moment in history.
I see. What is the, now this was pointed out in your book and in the documentary. What's the significance of Josephus's histories and the Gospels were being written at the same time?
Well, that was actually one of the things that sparked the whole investigation that led to the book. James came over to my apartment in the middle of the night and told me that he'd been reading, comparing Josephus to the New Testament Gospels and to the prophecies of Jesus coming back when the temple was destroyed. And he describes certain aspects of what that scene will look like that mirrored Josephus's description of the actual sacking of the temple 40 years later. So, of course, they were written at the same time. Both these things were written after the fact, the Gospels and Josephus, side by side. So the fact that those things were perfect mirror images of each other obviously suggested there was some kind of coordination.
Yeah.
The numerous parallels between the Flavian emperors and the descriptions of Christ had already been discussed by a scholar named Joseph Atwell, for example. We had noted those long before Joseph Atwell's book was even published, many of them at least. And furthermore, the way that Josephus describes the siege of Jerusalem is precisely what Jesus describes in the first three canonical Gospels. And so much so that what Jesus said could only imply that he was expecting the glorious coming of the Son of Man to happen when the temple was destroyed in 70 AD and Jerusalem razed to the ground. Well, the prophecy was obviously a post-event prophecy. So where is this glorious coming of the Son of Man? We have the temple destroyed, Jerusalem destroyed, cataclysmic events. But there were messiahs who claimed to be Jewish messiahs at the time, glorious comings of the Son of Man. And these were the Flavian emperors who had destroyed Jerusalem. And I was reading in Josephus, Vespasian is the Jewish Messiah. Wait a minute. He describes the siege of Jerusalem just as Mark 13 does, with armies fighting in the clouds, invoking earlier Jewish prophecies. So both Josephus and the Gospels use the same prophetic imagery to describe the glorious coming of a Messiah at this time. Jesus makes it very plain it will happen within the lifetime of people hearing him. And the destruction of Jerusalem and temple did happen at that time. But where's this glorious coming of the Son of Messiah? It could only be really a proof text for the Flavian claims. What you find in the Gospels, and based on this description or events that Josephus himself is describing, probably the very description, since I don't think there was probably an army fighting clouds over Jerusalem.
I see.
They share a common source, in other words, Josephus and the Gospels. And Josephus is a Roman propagandist.
Oh, that's
For
right.
the Flavians.
So you see
Now-
the connections between the Roman reaction to the Jewish war and early Christianity became more and more unmistakable. And when you look at the doctrines of the Jewish rebels versus New Testament Christians, it becomes clear that the New Testament is a critical reaction to the militant, nationalist, Torah orthodox, messianic Jewish rebels of the first 2 centuries. It seems that Christianity is a perfect critique of each of the elements that seem to have alienated the Jews from Roman culture or have inspired directly the war. Messiah, Torah orthodoxy, nationalism, militancy, not peace on earth and everyone can get along. It doesn't matter whether you're a Jew or a Greek. All that stuff we read in the New Testament is obviously Roman propaganda. And a recent scholar, Professor Robin Faith Walsh, a recent book from Cambridge University Press, which I highly recommend, basically demonstrates that the New Testament could only have been written by Greco-Roman elites of the period.
Wow. Wow.
Could
Now we
you
know that.
mention something about the so-called the agent, Paul, and how maybe that was a scheme in the long run?
Well, there is speculation that Paul himself was a Roman agent
Mm.
who was sent among the Jewish rebels to sort of sow division or to mollify some of their more belligerent tendencies. But there's a lot of mystery there in what exactly Paul was. Even the dating of Paul is still up in the air.
Mm.
In the book, we take a very standard consensus scholarly view on the dating of Paul. That his letters were written in the 50s and 60s, the middle of the first century, basically, which is where most scholars are. But that's really just been a carryover. There's not a lot of good reason for specific. There is no attestation for any of the contents of the New Testament until the second half of the second century AD. That is to say, not even Christian scholars will quote earlier Christian material found in the New Testament. We don't even have descriptions of this material apart from the most vague descriptions until the second half of the second century. A friend of mine, Jack Bull, a PhD candidate at King's College London, has pointed this out. And he said, he makes a really good point. In any other field of ancient history, you'd be laughed off the stage if you said this must be first century. There's really no attestation. But we take a very conservative date in the book. And since writing the book, I've become more and more convinced of a later and later dating to both Paul's letters and the Gospels. But to be safe, any time between, say, 50 and the 150 AD are any of the potential times, because we don't have any physical manuscript scraps of the New Testament until, and we have no attestation from other authors, even Christian authors, until the second half of the second century. So in terms of quotes and a clear naming of what we're reading. While we take that view, any time between, say, the years before the first revolt and the years following the second revolt are actually, from a strictly speaking scientific perspective, plausible dates for the New Testament. It's funny, though, that the Flavian era, the two Jewish wars are going on right at this moment. There was a question earlier. I'm sorry, I kind of lost sight of your original question.
I was going to ask, we know that Rome was open to accepting the religious affiliations of the people they conquered.
Oh.
But I'm assuming that the Jewish revolted because they didn't want to separate the state and their faith.
The Romans were very accommodating to foreign religions. They just absorbed foreign religions from the East to the Greek religion. They just one for one identified the pantheon early on. But you could worship Egyptian gods like Isis and Serapis in Rome. You could worship the Phrygian Great Mother. You could in time worship their enemy's god, Mithra from Persia. So they were just absorbing and developing a Roman version of all of these different Eastern religions. If there wasn't a Roman version of Judaism, it would really be a big lacuna in the area. Where is the Roman version of Judaism? Now, at first, the Romans gave exemptions to the Jews because they couldn't even say a prayer in the presence of an idol or a graven image, you see, which is very much against Mosaic law. So Jews were exempted from that and allowed to enforce the Mosaic law in their own territories. See how sensitive the Romans were to all this. It was only the Jewish war itself that brought that to an end.
Okay.
Yeah, the Jews were monotheists in a world dominated by polytheists, and there was a natural conflict.
And their religious
their
practice would seem to make them separatists, Romans said they were haters of all mankind in their anti-Semitic rants. But you'll notice they can't eat with foreigners because they have kosher diet. Foreigners, and for some Jews, were just impure. They have strict Sabbath observance. They have circumcision, which made it embarrassing and difficult for them to participate in Greek athletic activities, for example, from way back. So they had odd beliefs that that made it difficult for them to assimilate, or for women who were interested in being Jewish to become Jewish. What adult man would go through circumcision, for example? So it was a hard sell feature. So what Christianity seems to do is get rid of all of the, while most distinctive elements of Judaism are being knocked out of court, it seems to be making a kind of Messianic Judaism, which makes it easy for Jews to assimilate into the Roman world, and for Romans who were interested in Jewish monotheism to dabble with it or go even further and absorb it. Philosophical monotheism was on the rise since Plato and Neoplatonism. Syncretism of various religions was well underway at this time. And so there were many Romans interested in monotheism, but they didn't want to go all that far. So between the Gentiles who were interested in Judaism and the Jews who were wanting to work with the Romans and assimilate into the Roman world, Christianity provided the perfect answer.
Okay. Now let's go back a bit. We mentioned the symbols, and I think we talked briefly about the coinage. What were there similarities between like the Roman coinage and like religious symbols, as you say, the dolphin and the anchor?
Mr. Fahy, you go. He was the guy that I was skeptical we'd even find such an image, but he found this image, and when I finally was able to pick my jaw up from the floor when he showed me this image, it was astonishing. He did an inventory of ancient Roman coinage, convinced that we would somewhere find physical evidence of our thesis. Go, Mr. Fahy. Your work is
I believe
the world.
Well, from the very beginning, from that very first night, I was determined to investigate Roman coinage, because I thought that would be the last, the most uneradicatable type of evidence. Temples can be demolished, of course, manuscripts can be lost, but coins are minted in the millions. Every single time they would put out, say, 6 million silver coins in various different mints around the entire empire. So I knew there was no way you could get rid of all of those. And it did take over 30 years. It was the sort of like the final thing. My mother had gone to Rome, and she had brought back a souvenir from the catacombs of St. Domitilla. And it was a picture of the anchors flanked by 2 fish. And it was the famous Christian symbol from the earliest Christian catacombs in Rome. And so I was looking at this, and then meanwhile, I'm looking through Roman coins, Flavian coins, and I keep seeing the dolphin wrapped around the anchor, and I'm just not making the connection. And here's this plaque that my mother had given me. I've got it hanging on my wall. I finally just went, well, wait a minute, that's it. That's it right there. And so once we started looking into it, it was like an Easter egg hunt. Both of us went off in different directions and kept finding dolphins and anchors and dolphins and anchors throughout Christianity and throughout the Flavian era. And also another overlap. For instance, dolphins and tridents were used by both the Christians and the Flavians.
In the first 200 or 300 years of Christian history, it was far, far more common to depict Jesus symbolically as an anchor or as a fish wrapped around an anchor than it ever was the cross. We're all familiar with the fish, and sometimes it was a fish alone. Sometimes it was a fish wrapped around an anchor. A lot of times it was just the anchor with fish heading towards it, you see, which represents, I'm fishers of men, Peter, I'll make you fishers of men. So the Christian converts are now symbolized in terms of fish approaching.
Like the bait.
The bait, if you perfect, exactly.
And then you could swim with the dolphins also. Could you show the cover of your book and back there and explain that?
I don't know how well you can see the cover.
That looks good. They're good. Yeah.
This is actually taken from a mosaic Mr. Fahy discovered that was covered when Pompeii was exploded in 79 AD, in the midst of the Flavian era. And we know because of recent earthquakes there, it was a recent Flavian era mosaic
Mhm.
taken from Herculaneum. And here you have a remarkable thing. Fish and people are both coming towards the anchor. So in a totally pre-Christian Flavian symbology, what we're having is fish compared to people, all of them approaching the salvation of the anchor. Of
Mm.
course, it's a universal
Yeah.
symbol of safety. So it was a specifically Flavian image. It was used on mosaics. Who knows what it represented? Apollo, Jesus, the Flavians themselves, what? But the
Okay.
point is, that's distinctly Flavian imagery. And the first time we see it on Roman coins is on coins of Titus under his brother and successor. Those are discontinued. They're continued for a while and discontinued. The only other time there was a Roman use of that very image was under Hadrian during the Second Jewish Revolt. And then, of course, it was not used at all by any other emperors. And yet, in the very earliest physical evidence of Christianity of any kind, the earliest physical evidence of Christianity of any kind are those catacombs of Domitilla. And they are identified both as a Flavian site, burial site, while the inscription does say this is the sepulchre of the Flavians, right on the inscription. But it's identified symbolically inside as both Christian and Flavian by the use of anchor and fish and another few symbols that are used both by the Flavians and pagans, interestingly, and are repeatedly used by early Christians in the catacombs.
Okay. Okay.
You know, one fascinating thing that we discovered was a marble facing from the Colosseum of two dolphins wrapped around a trident. Now, a couple of miles away, the Christians are using that symbol in the catacombs.
Hmm.
Why are they using a Roman symbol from the Colosseum to identify themselves only a few miles away? This is the Colosseum where Christians were supposed to be thrown to the lions, and they're using the Roman symbol as their own in their catacombs. It doesn't make sense.
Well, the
There's got to be
Flavian
some.
amphitheater itself announces that it was constructed from the spoils of the Jewish war. It's the Flavian amphitheater, built over Nero's Golden House in the wake of the Jewish war by the Flavians.
Mm. That's something.
Now,
What's his?
I did further research on Roman coinage too that I found absolutely. I was actually writing a monograph on Roman propaganda at the time, including the coinage, when Mr. Fahy made the discovery. You will find on first century Roman coinage the ideology of the New Testament, and I will just go that far: mercy, compassion, forgiveness, concordia, harmonia, pax orbis terrarum, peace on earth, goodwill toward men. We might translate all that, right? Concordia, harmonia, pax orbis terrarum, peace on earth, goodwill toward men. We're about to celebrate Christmas. In Luke's famous nativity story, the angels announce peace on earth, goodwill toward men is what Jesus brings.
Mhm.
It's right on Roman coins.
Jiggling in people's pockets when the Gospels are being written.
And
That's
then
something.
we also found that Titus Flavius Clemens, another Flavian of that period, used the anchor. The anchor is his symbol because supposedly Domitian executed him by tying an anchor around his neck and throwing him into the ocean.
Mhm.
A millstone around your neck, you know. And so that St. Clement of Rome has an anchor to this day. On stained glass windows, you see him holding an anchor instead of a cross, or
We
sometimes
walk into
both.
the Catholic Church with the documentarians. They have a niche dedicated to St. Clement, and there he is with his anchor. And
That's
his
something.
name was Titus Flavius Clemens. He was a cousin of the emperor's, a member of the imperial family. He had married a granddaughter of Vespasian, a niece of Titus, and it's her catacombs
Yeah.
that are her burial site. Her body was later removed, but it was her burial site that became the earliest Christian catacombs, i.e., the earliest physical evidence of Christianity that exists.
That's incredible.
Right, the granddaughter and niece of two Roman emperors. Yeah.
And the interesting thing is, even ancient pagan historians, one of them says that Clemens was executed, quote, for adopting Jewish ways, and his wife was banished. Wait, what? And his family emperors claimed to be the real Jewish messiahs, and they hired a Jew to do their propaganda. So they were very well aware of the messianic prophecies and the role there. That's why they used it in their own propaganda. I'm the Jewish Messiah. I'm the Prince of Peace, who brought peace on earth and goodwill toward men and became a world ruler. And he had a son who was a son of God, Savior, who was himself a Jewish Messiah, who was the dude who entered Jerusalem at 30, just like Jesus did, to fulfill the very prophecy Jesus made as he's entering Jerusalem. Jesus walks into the temple and morally condemns it and starts physically attacking it, morally justifying and physically commencing the Roman destruction to come. When you look at all of these parallels and connections to the Flavians and the Jewish War, it becomes absolutely impossible not to see the intimate connection. The politics of the New Testament is radically clear. Romans 13, one of the oldest sections of the New Testament, obey the Roman state as God's appointed agents on earth, not just to practically get along and not, we don't want to cause trouble here. No. The Roman state are God's agent on earth. They bring the sword to justice. That's God's sword of justice. That's why rebellion is a sin. That's why paying your taxes is a moral obligation, not just a practical good idea. And then, of course, Jesus in the Gospels befriends tax collectors, impure people, says, pay your tax, render unto Caesar. He says of a Roman centurion, I've not seen so much faith, not even among anyone in Israel. So at this time of war with Rome and the Jews, it's not just a Roman he praises, but a Roman centurion, and he's got greater faith than any Jew he knows. Excuse the noise. I'm getting a little excited. But you see, what screams out as clearly Roman propaganda over and over and over and over and over and over and over becomes obvious. Put that together with evidence, the connections between early Christianity and the Roman elites, Roman government elites, Jews cooperating with the Roman emperors themselves knew about Roman religion, Jewish religion, and were using Jewish religion in their own propaganda.
Okay. Well, gentlemen, I'm actually I'm getting worse in my ailment here. But I have one more question. So both of you together, you can answer this one at a time or whatever. What did you really hope to accomplish by writing this book? What were your thoughts about, putting things together?
Well, of course, truth is one of the main reasons that you want to know what really is going on with our entire civilization. And this is a sort of a foundation that has had a lot of downsides for Western civilization. And so for the modern day in the 21st century, I think it's really important for us to finally get these things settled and not have some mystical question at the basis of everything that we're doing now in the modern day.
Good.
So yeah, we were able in demystifying these relics, which still dominate philosophy in the modern age, was, we felt, a very noble ambition.
You're here.
What we say at the end of the documentary is true. We have advanced morally. We really have over the years, and in some ways, we're still trapped by the ethics of the New Testament. And we're using the ethics of the New Testament, in effect. Even secular people, atheists, don't question that Jesus was a valid moralist, a good teacher, good ethics. And yet, those ethics really aren't helpful in the 21st century. I believe that what we really did was to expose the moral idealism of Christianity for what it really is. If you want to continue to be a Roman slave,
slave religion.
Yeah, turn the other cheek to any aggression, even when you can fight back. You can't even run away or block the punch. You got to say, other side. That's, or love your enemy. Submit to the evildoer. Blessed are the peacemakers. On and on and on and on and on and on.
Obey the emperor. Yeah.
Well, my goodness. I reject Christian morality, and we expose Christian morality for what it was, largely propaganda in those respects. And if you want to continue to act like a Roman slave, you're free to do so. Or you may want to question your philosophy. Maybe you have to re-question the whole field of ethics that you were raised with if you're a Christian. And so I was hoping to accomplish, and I didn't realize that at first. At first, I thought it was just an interesting little thing. But it vindicates, I think, also Ayn Rand's view that altruism is ultimately power lust politically, where there's a sacrifice being asked, there's someone collecting sacrifices. Now, Ayn Rand didn't know the relationship between Christian altruism and the politics of the day, politics of slavery and tyranny. But we think, and again, quite accidentally, I had no idea that we would end up doing this, but I think we've vindicated Ayn Rand's view that altruism is really a rationalization for power.
Yeah,
And then you have on the good note, but then, and that could be a follow up for the next time about how the cross and the Cairo cross came around, and then if you want to have a crucifixion or hanging, as they say in Monty Python, but also the serious thing that you should take the cross and feel guilty and so on. But during this season, in English, it's called Christmas. But in other languages, like in Swedish, it's called jul, like Yuletide. So do you have any ending comment on that? And also about this value for value, how we could support your great work here and the documentary and the individuals behind the documentary, and how we could continue the conversation about this.
It's wonderful how paganism about Christmas still bleeds through, doesn't it, in certain European cultures? I mean, is there anything about an evergreen tree or candles and lights or so much Santa
like
Claus?
A log
Right,
log
exactly.
at the fireplace.
Right, Father Christmas or Saint Nicholas. I know it's based on Saint Nicholas, but there's so much of Christmas, the way it's celebrated in the West by Christians, has absolutely nothing to do with Christianity. It has more to do with the winter solstice celebrations, where the sun has reached its low point and now it's going to get bigger and bigger. Evergreenness you see as a symbol of life through winter. That's all from paganism. I'm sorry. It's a seasonal thing, and long before Christianity. That's why I celebrate Christmas. But as to the rest, I'll let Mr. Fahy answer.
Oh well, I think you did a good job. that sums it up.
Well, you asked the second part, right? What did we?
The second part, which was, I'm sorry.
Value for value. Is that what you meant, Martin?
Yeah. And how we could continue the conversation and spread the good word about your excellent work and the documentary and the individuals behind that documentary.
Of course, the book is available now, and the documentary will become available in other foreign markets outside of the United States.
Good.
Progressively.
It's available on
There's
Amazon.
about 15 different streaming.
Be available on other platforms shortly.
Yes. Good deal. Good deal.
Right. And the book.
All right. What else?
What else
should be working on right now, if anything?
Mr. Fahy is always writing something. I'm writing. I'm hoping to collaborate with now. As I say, there's a growing number of scholars we have a school now who believe in Roman provenance, and we're working on a book, historical book. I hope with them. And more than that, I want to back up and write generally about Christianity and religion in general, and pluses and minuses, as Mr. Fahy indicates, mostly minuses in the book, because this opens up a whole new understanding, I think, of Western religion. But Mr. Fahy, as I say, is the greatest novelist of our time, and he's always working on something brilliant. Please check out Magenta. Please check out his other novels. I mean, some of his work, some of the finest philosophical writing you'll ever come across is in Mr. Fahy's work. I hope that sells.
Well, thank you. I'm working right now on the third and final book of my Fragment series, which is a science thriller, and it's called Symbiont. And that will finish off that trilogy, which is continuously being shopped on. We'll see. And then also I did just finish Magenta, and that is a sort of 1984 Orwellian 21st century
Right.
take on oppression and high tech oppression. And fascinatingly, that book, you just could not get that. I had sent that to my publisher of Pandemonium, one of my novels, and he said, "Oh, it's really well done. I just don't think it's the right time for a dystopian novel." And at that particular day, in that moment, George Orwell's 1984 was #1 at Amazon after 75 years.
It's
And
not the
I
right
couldn't
moment.
help it. Not the right moment for dystopian novel. I guess nobody's in the mood.
And you would
Anyway,
have
so I
thought that after the government lockdowns on COVID and stuff.
yeah, they would. But anyway, so I didn't want it to be adulterated in any way. So I just published it myself. It's available through Amazon everywhere. So
Okay,
Now,
great.
mind you,
those are,
he said books published by Random House and Macmillan, and I think Symbiote will probably get a really good publisher as well.
Yeah.
Casey has done every kind of writing in every area, and what's so perverse to me is that what may be his philosophical magnum opus, he's publishing himself, and he,
yeah,
look out for deals because
you
he's
can't
off.
get a book. Yeah, there's no way you can publish a book like that through a major publisher anymore. And I mean, if you think about it, where are the great novels today?
There aren't any.
It's a sad commentary
They're
on philosophical novels, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm surprised
Yeah.
that degree of philosophy you managed to put into your thrillers.
Yeah.
I've appeared on the New York Times bestseller list. He manages to get in philosophy in those as well. So anything he writes, ladies and gentlemen, this audience would be interested in.
I'm sure. Well, gentlemen, James, Warren, thanks for manning the foxhole with us today.
Thanks.
Well, thank you guys.
Absolutely.
You guys are the best.
Appreciate it very much.
Lots of fun.
I have to sign off, or I'm just gonna go into a horrible coughing fit. So, gentlemen,
All
take
right,
care.
great.
Yeah.
And Martin, can you handle it?
Yep.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, Blair.
Wait a second.